I think the biggest question, and this is very topical, is just around Disney and launching their own direct-to-consumer offering. And I guess there's one camp that believes that Disney is not really going to find a place with millennials as compared to what Netflix would, and therefore they're probably going to be more complementary services, and there's not going to be a ton of risk to Netflix as a result. Then there's the other camp, which I think, if you've been listening to me for the last month or so, you kind of know where I sit, but I think it's going to be more of a risk to Netflix going forward. And I guess I'd just love to hear your thoughts on how you think Disney resonates across the generations, and what this potentially means for the company and the whole landscape.
Well, I think it's they're batting 100 lately. I mean, they came across with the direct option on ESPN Plus, and now they're doing this thing. I guess when they announced the price, I don't know what happened to the price of Disney that day, but it just absolutely popped. Yep. And then 21st Century Fox, which is just absolutely tons and tons of content. So they've got suddenly all this content to shovel out. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure that, I know for a fact they've been planning this for a long time. Many of my friends have actually been working, who used to be working at Time Warner and Viacom, are now working for Disney. Yeah. So they're tooling up for this. And I think I'm very positive about it. Yeah. I'm very positive about it. I think that the market in this case, the market often makes mistakes. But I think in this case, it is anticipated correctly. Yeah. And keep in mind that Disney, is it's a more highly valued company than some of the other, media companies. Yeah. But it ain't anywhere near Netflix.
But it's justified, right?
Right. I think it's totally justified. And your question about millennials and Disney is really an interesting story, because Disney is one of those brands that Warren Buffett would love. Yeah. It's like the Coca-Cola of media brands. It is absolutely iconic, and the first generation really to grow up with Disney as kids was boomers. Yeah. With all those Davy Crockett hats and the Disneyland and all those Disney shows and cartoons, the original ones they listened to. And then it was interesting that they went through that G-rated kind of programming, went through a fallow area during the 70s, late 60s, 70s, early 80s, exactly when Gen X was kids. Yep. So Gen Xers actually did not have nearly as much contact with Disney. I did a book on Gen X called 13th Gen. Okay. It came out in, I think, 1992. But it had R.J. Mattson, who did cartoons. Mm-hmm. And I remember we had this one cartoon showing that, the Xers growing up during the absolute eclipse of any G-rated programming. And I remember there was one cartoon that showed this family driving up to this theater, and it says, Benji. And then there was a sign under it, next G-rated film, 500 miles. Yeah. Anyway, that was their upbringing. Mm-hmm. But when boomers started having kids, right, in the late 80s and 90s, Disney started producing again.
That was like their sweet spot.
Exactly.
Like the early 90s.
And so boomers started taking all their millennial kids to see these things, right? And that was the golden age of kids' cartoons. Yeah. I actually still think that 40, 50, 70, 100 years from now, we'll still be looking back at,
well, that was also
Aladdin
like the animation
and the Lion
Renaissance,
King.
right?
It was but even before the CGI and all of the Toy Story stuff and all that, Lion King and Aladdin and all those incredibly inventive, incredibly artistic, wildly popular. So many of them have been turned into musicals, touring the world now. Yep. And they made a huge connection with millennials. When Gen X has had kids, right? And this is really beginning, with late wave millennials and the beginning of the Homeland generation. Again, there's been a little bit of a fallow period, but it's coming back. Mm-hmm. And you just interview all of these millennials who are now having kids. and they all swear by Disney,
Yeah.
right? Because that was their experience. That was all that part of that new protection of children,
Sure.
and everything that was innocent and great.
Yep.
And whether it's the cartoons or whether it's Miley Cyrus or Hannah Montana and all that stuff. And some of them have a nostalgia for it. But some of it, who are a little younger, have a false nostalgia for it. Mm-hmm. But they all think it's great. And also the idea, another thing that critics bring up is whether or not young adults will go for something that's as family friendly as Disney. And I think absolutely
well, I mean, look,
they
the
will.
Disney Plus service,
Absolutely
I think, and my take on it, and I think we're on the same page here, is the ability for it to kind of transcend generations. And Disney acquiring Marvel, Lucasfilms, it's not just, it's not the Disney Vault, it's not just Snow White, it's not just, Aladdin, it's also all the Marvel flicks.
It's all that other stuff, but the iconic Disney brand. I mean, one thing about Disney is, and by the way, all of the other networks complain about this. Mm-hmm. They think it's like trashy for Disney, but I think secretly they had a real case of jealousy. And that is, they'd always used to say that one thing about Disney is when you flipping around the channel and you come out on Disney Channel, mm-hmm. within 3 seconds you know that it's Disney. It's just a look. There's a feel. You know it's Disney. Mm-hmm. And over the last 15 years, when parents were looking for a brand they could trust, that actually helped to Disney. Viacom, to give an example, always had a problem because even though it was popular for a while and then it wasn't popular, but one of the problems that parents complained about was that they didn't know what the Viacom brand was. I mean, they had great shows, they had SpongeBob and all these great, mm-hmm. but what was their brand? What did they stand for? Disney has never had that problem. And my thesis has always been that millennials are fundamentally a conventional generation. Mm-hmm. They love a brand. They love a set of unities that actually brings the brand coherence. And they are also incredibly family oriented. Yeah. This generation is either living with its family or calling its parents every day, or they're getting advice from their mom and dad, or they're doing errands for their mom and dad. So there is zero generation gap culturally in terms of values between millennials and their boomer parents. But mm-hmm. I'm talking about older millennials, people in their late 20s, early 30s today, and their boomer parents. They buy the same brand name clothing, they listen to the same movies, they watch the same stuff, they get nostalgic over the same stuff. So this is a great idea. Now the acquisition of 21st Century and all that stuff just brings a little bit more mature, a little bit edgy. A little bit edge, exactly. And some of the stuff they already got, like Lucas.
But they can put that, and then one of the pushbacks that we often get is like, Disney, it is more family oriented, so like, is it, like if you want that edgier content, like you won't be able to get through that service. But they have Hulu, right?
Well, they have Hulu too,
yeah,
right.
So they can take all that Fox content, put it in Hulu, and bundle it all together at a great price.
And in addition, remember, even millennials are saying you have kids, right? And so what do you want with your kids? Well, again, you're probably something a little less edgy than you wanted later on. Now, Netflix and Disney will still have different types of programming, right? Netflix will be a little bit more mature, a little edgier, a little bit more for, mm-hmm. Singles and, just people who are, it's going to be more kind of sort of Gen X. Yeah. You know what I mean? There's a lot of that, a lot of kind of violent stuff. Sure. And kind of HBO sort of fills that market too at kind of the very high end. And they do HBO produces a lot. They produce HBO and Disney. Yeah. HBO and Netflix. They produce a lot of really high-end, great content. Yeah. But I think there's a big empty spot for Disney. And the other thing about Disney is that Disney has its theme parks. Yeah. It has huge amounts of revenue that's been rising from that.
They also have a reach of 90 million households.
But music is going the same direction. Mm-hmm. More toward in-person contact.
Yeah, like Live Nation and those types of companies.
So in other words, the music streaming is bringing a little bit of revival in revenue for mm-hmm. to performers and artists. Yeah, yeah. But nonetheless, it's tiny compared to what it used to be in the late '90s. But my point is that they are going more toward in-person. More of the revenue in music is coming to in-person.
Well, look, Disney needs to. Disney's always been about capturing the household unit, right? And so now with this Disney Plus service, they're going to control the pipe. and they're going to be able to feed you everything that you could ever want and control that relationship.
And whatever they introduce, they'll have a little, you know, dolls and T-shirts, and they'll have a new.
I mean, you could probably maybe even buy stuff.
They'll have a new ride in Orlando, and you know they'll do
advertise
the whole thing.
their own brand through the service.